Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and this will be part 2 in the series Unlocking the Giza Plateau, the Ancient Science of Astronomy, Geometry and Metrology of the Pyramids. And the entire Giza complex in essence is a complex, and it's actually linked. It's linked very beautifully, and to further the previous episode, the link will be in the description. I would strongly advise watching that first if you haven't seen it, because it introduces a lot of the concepts, ancient practices such as the stretching the cord ceremony, an introduction into the importance of the annual flood cycle or Akhet. But we'll be reviewing some of that along the way, at least the flood. But the question is, where is the very center of the Giza complex? And I'm absolutely certain I have identified it, and it is, as we'll see, at the northwest corner of the Khafre Valley Temple. So that from where did the designers of the Great Pyramids base their plans, the entire complex, including Causeway's pyramid? It's right here, on the northwest corner of Khafre Valley Temple, right above this doorway. So we have an aerial view, and we have the Great Pyramid, or Pyramid of Khufu, also called Cheops. We have the Khafre Pyramid, also called Khafre, and the Menkaure Pyramid. Now you might notice you can see the faint trace of lines here. This is an 8-sided pyramid, and same with the Menkaure Pyramid is also an 8-sided pyramid. Another major feature of the Giza Plateau is the Khafre Causeway, which leads down by the Sphinx to the Khafre Valley Temple, and the lesser known Causeway tomb/pyramid. But where is the center? Well, the center is right here, just above this doorway, in line with the causeway. We see that the causeway actually begins, the alignment begins in the Khafre Valley Temple itself. There are some features, we'll be going to that more in future episodes, but there are many other features in this, so again, we're just going to do an introduction. So we begin with the 0 point, and this has to be the 0 point, and I'll explain. Link in the description. Guilio Magli, along with Juan Belmonte, he's one of the leading authors who is looking to the archeoastronomy and the tangible scientific elements of the design of the Giza Plateau, but also Egypt in general and wider, and you'll find these papers linked in the description. But from the 0 point, right down the center, exactly between the Khufu and Khafre Pyramid, the two of the Great Pyramids, it is aligned to the summer solstice. That's also the New Year's Day of the ancient Egyptians, and it also marks the Akhet season, the beginning of the flood season, or the inundation. New Year's Day, the beginning of the flood, and this is an essential element in regards to understanding the pyramid text, the coffin text, as well as the Book of the Dead. And again, future episodes will be breaking that down and examining, well, the tangible scientific elements based in these particular ancient texts, which unfortunately have been read as a purely religious, purely symbolic document. Well, actually, it involves those elements, but there are also very important scientific elements based in this. It's describing the cycle of life, the seasons, astronomical movements, and the description in the ancient text actually matches the architecture individually in places such as the Great Pyramid, but we'll find the same in Thebes, in Abydos, in Heliopolis, and the length of breadth of Egypt. We're going to find this geometry, this astronomy embedded in the larger architectural practice of the ancients, and we'll examine this, and we can beyond all reasonable doubt prove it. But as viewed from the 0 point, this would be the view on the summer solstice. The sun would set right between the Khafre Pyramid and the Great Pyramid. Now, it's often confused. The Khafre Pyramid is that which still has the casing stones on top. The Great Pyramid has no casing stones, and it's a bit dull at the point. The Great Pyramid originally was taller than the Khafre Pyramid, but it appears that Khafre's is taller because it's on a platform 33 feet or 10 meters higher. So that's another common error, but it's actually the Great Pyramid is the tallest, and the difference between these two also will link in an extraordinary way. But the symbol of Akhet, the season of a flood, is the sun going down between two mountains, and we see this here. Now, this is engineered. The pyramids were built, however, this is part of a natural landscape, and this is before the pyramids was built. This Akhet symbol, the season of a flood, was already embedded at this place, and the 0-point marker, I would strongly urge, predates the pyramids itself, and that's part of this episode. This is what we'll be looking at. So firstly, we have a 28-degree angle. So the equinoxes, that's true east, so 28 degrees north of true east, or 298 degrees, is the summer solstice marker directly between the two of the largest pyramids. The causeway bisects this angle precisely at 14 degrees. You can check this on Google Earth or a similar program. The causeway is at 14 degrees and it does bisect that line. So we're bisecting the summer solstice and the equinox, the autumn equinox, or spring, depending on which way we're moving throughout the year. So we have a 0-point marker to begin with, astronomically aligned, architecturally pointing to this particular place. But when I read this paper by Magli, I decided to look in a little bit further. And so where would the winter solstice be? Well, it's running right across the corner of the fourth of the largest independent structures there, the Causeway tomb / pyramid. So we have summer solstice, the equinoxes, and the winter solstice being marked out. This leaves Menkaure sitting there, but there's something to that as well. So that's precisely at 28 degrees. Again, you can check this on Google Earth, and it runs right across the corner of Causeway. The midpoint will hit Menkaure Pyramid, so 14 degrees. These angles, and well, much more information to come on that. It's a very harmonic, wonderful system because it leads to not just the astronomy, but also some highly advanced mathematics, geometry, timekeeping, linking to symbolism, which actually links across the world, very important harmonic sacred numbers, let's call them. So there we see a screenshot. So I've gone at precisely 28 degrees south of true east, and at 28 degrees it just skirts the corner. It does not impact the pyramid, it touches the corner. And for the metrologists, people who are familiar with the Egyptian royal cubit, you might notice that this distance from there to the 0 point, the 0 marker, is 314.17 meters. Now it's hard to be you cannot be centimeter precise, but now the map length is a straight line. If you ever use Google Earth, pay attention that the ground length includes the terrain. So the ground length, if you go from one side of Mount Everest, for instance, directly across, you'll find that the map length and the ground length are hugely different because it's going to follow the terrain. So you don't even need to look at the ground length, it's the map length which gives you your survey point. So the line from the 0 point marking the winter solstice just touches, actually doesn't touch, it's an infinite line. The importance of the solstice, and we have a line which goes off into infinity. That's what I'm calling it for the moment. This is the same with the equinoxes and the summer solstice. It doesn't hit anything. At least nothing prominent. So any line's going to hit something, but symbolically at least, especially the equinox line, it doesn't. It runs along the base of Khafre's pyramid, but it doesn't actually touch or hit the base. This is a important feature because we have infinite alignments, but the midpoints between the solstice and the equinox is a finite alignment. It actually hits the Menkaure pyramid and the Khafre pyramid, and that will actually lead to some very, very interesting geometry, measurement, astronomy, essentially scientific secrets of the ancients, and it's measurable, tangible, and it's testable. So the Khafre Valley Temple, this is the view from Google Earth. We see we're walking out the door, and just above that doorway is a 0 point marker. If you're to measure it, it was common practice, for instance, in Karnak, the priest would go onto the roof of a temple to make his observations. So it's actually the 0 point marker is on the roof, not in the doorway itself. But from that position, where this man is standing, probably doesn't realize it, and that lady, they're actually at the center of the Giza complex, both in survey and probably symbolically as well. But what we have is an observatory and a calendar, and it's marking the pulse of Egyptian life. Architecturally and astronomically, all things point to this 0 marker on the northwest corner of the Khafre Valley Temple. Now might be coincidence, but okay, let's go further. Now, again, test this on Google Earth. Draw a circle centered on the 0 point and go either to the southeast corner of the Khafre Pyramid or the southwest corner of the Great Pyramid. It's equidistant from this point. This makes it very, very special, very rare. Coincidence? Well, this circle, as best as I can use because of the angle of the image, you would think that's clearly not the center of the Great Pyramid. We can go from corner to corner, and this red circle passes through or very, very close to the center of the Great Pyramid. Another important feature which only happens at this 0 point. I've seen many other efforts to say it was Gebel Gibli or other positions, but astronomically and by this method as well, it only happens here. Yet there's more, because we draw another circle centered on the 0 point. From the northeast corner of Khafre Pyramid to the northeast corner of the Great Pyramid is also equidistant. This is the 0 point marker. It has to be. Now, coincidence? Okay, well, let's go more coincidence. From the southeast corner of the pyramid, we draw a line to where it intersects with the blue circle. And again, test this on Google Earth, please do. You'll find it's at 14 degrees north of true east, exactly parallel with the Khafre Causeway. That's the 0 point. There's more to it than this. Again, there is no other hypothesis that even comes close to these particular coincidences of it. Again, there's much more, and it actually linked to other places such as Thebes, Heliopolis, and Abydos as well. But again, more for that in the future. So the secrets of time, measurement, and geometry through the astronomy and the architecture of the Giza Plateau only leads to one point, and that's on the northwest corner above the doorway of the Khafre Valley Temple. This is the 0 point marker. As it appears now, the Giza complex of pyramids, which are marvelous works of engineering, actually have an origin in the natural world. This place has been occupied along with Heliopolis. This site has been occupied and very important, going back exactly, I don't know how long, but a very long time. And before they designed the pyramids, this place was already special because of these astronomical reasons. It's a calendar, it's an observatory, and it was this before the pyramids was built. This is built on a natural environment. So now we're at the Giza Plateau. We're looking west towards where the sun would set, and this is what we have now. So we have the Causeways tomb / pyramid, the Menkaure pyramid, the Khafre pyramid. In front we have the Sphinx, and we have the Great Pyramid. An important feature I'll examine more, but from the 0 point we see the profile of the Khafre pyramid. From this point we see the corner angle of the Great Pyramid, and this in itself will explain quite a bit in regards to the metrology, geometry, and links to other parts of Egypt and temple design, especially in regards to the flood season, Akhet. So let's hop in a time machine and we can start to recreate the environment as it was before. So beneath as it is now, and well, as best as I can do, a reconstruction of what it could have been like going back before the pyramids were built. And it would have been something like this, with these three mounts and structure sticking up out of the ground where the Sphinx is now. The engineered environment we have today and the pre-engineering as it was made by nature as a natural observatory and a very sacred site going back into quite some time. The geological, geomorphological study of the original hill at the base of the Fourth Dynasty Egyptian monuments. Susan Reynald, Henry Delabois, Frederic Mahmoud Nakrum, and Joel Berto are the authors of this paper, and this again will be linked in the description. What they've done is show that this was a pre-existing natural site before the engineering of the Giza Plateau. This is a screenshot from their paper, and where you can see this is Khafre's pyramid or Khafre. There was a natural hill. The Great Pyramid, Khufu or Cheops, a natural hill. Also Causeway and the Sphinx were natural features. Before they built the pyramids, this calendar, this astronomical observatory was already in place. For instance, Causeway's tomb / pyramid, well, it's evident that this is part of it's still connected to the bedrock. There has been construction added to it on top and on the sides. Some of it lost, but the Causeway's tomb is part of a natural environment. It was there before. So now we see the southwest corner of Khafre's pyramid, and you can still see where the natural stone exists. And then we've had some of the surviving casing stones, and then we see the construction of the pyramid above it. They also point out, so we can see the natural lines of the rocks that they've carved down, and it's also reflected in the surviving this corner of Khafre's pyramid. While on the northwest corner of Khafre Pyramid, now it's this region you're not allowed to walk around, so you can't get there on Google Earth, but you can see there and the picture that they've taken in the paper where we still have the natural stone, including natural features. So Khafre's pyramid was not chosen specifically, it was already built on a pre-existing site, a natural location. The same can be said of the Great Pyramid. So there on the northeast side, again we can see this image where we have natural surviving stone, the original hill, mountain. We can get there on Google Earth, and if we zoom in, again we can see that same natural processes at work, and this was a pre-existing structure, natural structure. The same goes for the Pyramid of Khufu, but also here at the Great Pyramid, there is a mound underneath a plug upon which it was built. Again, this natural outcrop which existed before. And it's not exactly sure, because it's very difficult, but it definitely exists, because if this red line represents the ground level outside, the descending passage hits bedrock before that point, so there is definitely a plug there. Also the grotto, where we go down the well shaft as it's called, the grotto sits again in bedrock, right on that line there. Now there has been some work above it, but the grotto itself is in the bedrock. And now that descending the well shaft, then we have a short distance till we get to the subterranean chamber. So this is a view of the well shaft looking directly up. Okay, this is the grotto, and here we have the subterranean pit. Now, it's often speculated that this was that wasn't finished because they were in a rush, or that this was done to tune the pyramid. I can't be certain, but I would say that these are the grotto, the well shaft, and the subterranean pit were pre-existing features, sacred areas, regions within the pre-existing sacred hill, which marked the solstice, combined with the Khufu pyramid as well. And the reason for their original looking nature, with only a little bit of extension work, is the fact to preserve the original sacred site that was there before the pyramids. So the Menkaure, Khafre's pyramid, the Great Pyramid are all natural structures. They pre-exist at location. Now, of course, we have the Great Sphinx as well, and this is the same. So here we see older pictures of the Sphinx. After some of the excavations, up to its neck, the Sphinx has been buried in sand. Even older accounts talk of this. Its head was above, at least for many hundreds or thousands of years. The Sphinx, only its head has been exposed. And worth noting as well, what we have is this natural erosion patterns here around the neck. So here's an aerial view. This is the best picture. There was higher resolution ones, but this was the best angle because it shows that the body of the Sphinx itself was not a natural feature. It was carved down from the bedrock. The head existed above the bedrock. The body was created. And we also see, so the Sphinx Temple, and here we have the Khafre Valley Temple. That's the doorway, and directly above it is your 0 point marker leading up the Causeway. But the Sphinx's head being above that. So again, we see these erosion marks around the neck, and you also get a hint of the strata, the different levels of rock. So we have a level, and this line is a thin level of weak rock, weakly cemented. Another one and another one. These layers of rock will build up. It's limestone build up over time. They're of different qualities, and they will be eroded at different rates. The head is quite hard. The body and the neck is quite soft in comparison to. So this is in the White Sahara, not too far away in those terms, and this is the natural structures that appear in there as well. Again, we can see the weak line has been eroded away, and the neck has been eroded, leaving a head. Now, this is another example from the Sahara as well. This is showing the natural processes at work. And here is another. As the sand gets blown by the wind, it's going to go along the ground and it's going to attack the lowest level. So that's why the neck gets carved out first. Same as what we have on the Sphinx prior to the when it was buried up to its neck. That's where the sand was going to hit, and it's going to wear away at the neck. It's just natural processes. Here's another example from the same region of the Sahara. So we see at the ground level how this has been worn away. The strong rock has resisted this abrasion, while this neck, being weak as stone, has not survived so well, just like the neck on the Sphinx. And you can also see how it applies to these different levels. But again, these are natural features and very sphinxy, guardians, ghouls, all sorts of animals, faces could be attached to these things. So what it was originally, it's hard to know, but we see evidence that this is what was happening at the Sphinx. This natural outcrop with a weak neckline above the sand was being attacked, creating a natural looking Sphinx such as this. So again, another example where we can get a bit better where the lines, where the strata are formed, and the weak lines get attacked and erode much quicker, and we see the same happening here. So these natural strata and the erosion processes of the abrasion from the blowing winds are going to create many sphinxes, and this particular region in Sahara has many of them, and with other sphinx type face-like, animal-like structures around the world. So the entire complex Now we'll get to Menkaure, but the Khafre, the Great Pyramid, Causeways, and the Sphinx are natural structures, as has been shown with this paper here. Again, this will be linked in the description. And then we have the Khafre Valley Temple, and I'll do that in future episodes. But yeah, so originally was the Sphinx probably something like this. It could have been more human head, it could have been an animal head, it could have been a hawk, it could have been all sorts of creatures, a baboon, a dog, a lion, it could have been anything. But the stone itself, the natural processes of a region show it was probably some sort of creature like with a neck and those features. So before the pyramids was built, the Giza complex was already part of a natural landscape. It was an observatory and a calendar before the engineering was begun on the location. The equinoxes and the summer solstice were already marked out by these natural mounds. And mounds were very important, and especially in regards to the flood cycle of Egypt. And the winter solstice by Causeways tomb. And what's happened now is that they've been added to, and a very complex math and geometry has been created to make the pyramids and to turn the natural, almost perfectly geometric structures there into something which embeds very, very high levels of mathematics and geometry, and it's measurable, it's testable, and that was engineered. But to begin with, it was a natural site made from natural hills. So the Giza Plateau now, looking west, you can start to recreate it, and the original site would have had an appearance something along the lines of this. Causeway tomb pyramid, the mountain which originally created Khafre's pyramid, and the Great Pyramid with the Sphinx head, or whatever it was originally, poking up out of the ground. So, the seasons of Egypt. We begin at the end of the dry season. The summer solstice sets down between Khafre and the Great Pyramid, originally. The summer solstice, or the Egyptian New Year, marks the arrival of the flood. Then we have the season of growing, of where the water goes down, and we have agriculture happening, or the beginning of that. Then we have the winter solstice, and we come back towards the equinox, leading into the summer solstice, bringing us back to the dry period, and we repeat the cycle year after year after year. This was the heartbeat of Egypt, and before the pyramids, this was this was part of the essence of their economy, of their culture, of their civilizations, of their myths and legends was built around these cycles, and it began with a natural observatory, and it led to something which was very engineered and very scientific, very precise. To understand ancient Egypt, or for that matter to understand the Sumerians and Babylonians who lived on the Tigris-Euphrates River, or even the Indus people of, which is now India, Pakistan, these ancient civilizations were all river people, and it was the annual flooding cycle that defined the very rhythm of life. However, the Egyptian flood happens in the summer solstice. Unlike the usual spring flood that is just common across the world, the Nile flood arrived in the middle of summer, which would have been a great relief in this extraordinary heat of the surrounding deserts. But there's a reason for that, and we'll look at it. Firstly, so we have the Giza complex and the pyramids. As it is now, the Nile River is 8 kilometers or 5 miles away from there. In the last, since photography, the river has not moved. In the past, it has followed a different course, because Giza basically marks where the Nile Delta begins, where the river starts to break off into different parts, and it was a marshy land before. Cairo is these parts of Cairo are completely new. They couldn't have existed a century ago, or before 1970 and the High Aswan Dam, which stopped the annual flood cycle, which was the essence of ancient Egypt going back into prehistory. But as it is now, 8 kilometers, 5 miles to the river. From these older photos we can see the drop-off, which we see there just beneath the northeast corner of a Great Pyramid, where there's now a golf course. Well, that's what it used to be like during the flood season. Again, we can see here, like we're literally sailing up to the base of the pyramid. Again, we can see that feature there. So the waters came right up to here in the past. All of this Cairo could not have existed. It is a very, very new city in that sense. Other examples, so we see the people living there built their towns on mounds, elevated above the flood. You simply could not exist unless you were doing that. So here we have what Egypt is now. We don't have the flood cycle anymore. Generations of Egyptologists and other people, this is the world they see. This is the Egypt that they're used to. However, during the summer solstice and the following period, this is what the Nile would have been like. It's a very, very different landscape. It's and it's the essence of understanding all of Egyptian history prior to the building of the dams on the Nile. The same would apply for the marshlands of southern Iraq and the Sumerian, Chaldean, Babylonian cultures, and these other cultures, the Danube cultures. They all built on elevated mounds because they had to, because of the flood cycle. But Akhet, the season of inundation or the season of the flood, and the summer solstice marks the new year of ancient Egypt. And we see the Akhet, and again Akhet based on natural mounds before the pyramids. From Herodotus, he even speaks of inland from the sea as far as Heliopolis. Egypt is a wide land, all flat, water and marshy. The Nile Delta. It's the river starts to twist and turn and meander across a flat plain. As we're further upriver, it follows a more strict course. But the Egyptian, so even though Herodotus come quite a bit after the building of a pyramid, the same essence of Egyptian life remained, and that was the flood. And the Egyptians were shocked to find out that the Greeks relied on rain, not the flood, to survive. And they said he said that someday the Greeks would be disappointed in their high hopes and miserably starve, signifying thereby that it should be in heaven's will to send the Greeks no rain and afflict them with drought. Famine must come upon them because they do not rely on the flood cycle. Here's an example of the Pyramid of Unas in these ancient pyramid texts, but whether it's the coffin texts or the Book of the Dead, we're going to see, whether it's written or drawn, imagery such as this. And this is for the marsh or the field of reeds. It is a depiction of the Egyptian afterlife. And the thing about the Egyptian afterlife is that it reflected the living world. What we actually have here is a calendar, beginning with the flood, the flood, the growth season, and then the harvest season. Akhet, inundation, is the flood season. Peret, or emergence, is the growth season. Shemu is the dry or the harvest season, and that's the time to feast. So we begin with Akhet, inundation, or the flood season. But firstly, here's the important question: what is Egypt? Egypt is not the pyramids, it's not the temples. Egypt is the Nile. Nothing would exist, nothing could exist, no one would be there would be no civilization if it was not for the Nile River. And to ancient Egypt, it was defined by the flood, both in the living and in the afterlife. The flood cycle was the essence of ancient Egyptian culture, mythology, economy, and every element of their lives. So Africa, there we see Cairo, and where the Giza Plateau is, the Nile River, leading up to the cataracts. And, well, where does the Nile River come from? It comes from a very, very long distance away. It begins in, such as Mount Stanley in the Congo. If people think of a Congo, think of heat and desert. And there is rain, and it is a rainforest, and those rains feed into the White Nile, but it's also the melting snow in winter that feeds the White Nile, while the highlands of Ethiopia are also mountains and snow, and that melting snow feeds into the Blue Nile, and they converge together to create the Nile. It is the essence of Egypt. This is what makes Egypt happen. So Egypt is the Nile, the river is its spine, and the flood cycle is the heartbeat of Egypt. So back to the summer solstice. Akhet, the beginning of the flood season. I'm using Budge, an Egyptian hieroglyph dictionary, in Horizon. So the pyramids are also called, for instance, the oldest records of them call that the Horizon of Khufu and the Horizon of Khafre. That's the term for it, and this is also the symbol for it, which also represents the setting sun, beginning of the solstice, and the beginning of the Egyptian New Year. New Year's Day, we see the same symbol between two mountains and the sun setting, and that little figure on top, where we can see to flourish, blooming year, time in general, or the last year of a king's reign. Again, time, flourish, or a long time. This symbol represents, more often than not, time. And so we see time, New Year's, the horizon, the flood cycle. New Year's Day literally is the solstice and the flood cycle. There are, in later periods, some variations on it. Again, we see Akhet with the sun setting between the mountains. See this instrument on top and between the two lines. Well, that instrument up here represents heaven, sky, ceiling, what is above. We have the horizon, or Akhet, and then the lines of yesterday evening and this morning. The sun, yesterday's sunset and this morning's sunrise. Just like the solstice and the equinox cycle, this is again reference to the flood season. Now there are also, for instance, words such as arche is to flourish, to burst into flower, to bloom. Flood. Arche, to flood, to irrigate, to inundate. Akhet, the first season of the Egyptian year. Akhet, Ombos, as in the Kom Ombo temple, which is next to the cataracts, which the Egyptians considered the source of the Nile. Ombos was a goddess. Also, Ark, pond, lake, canal. Now, I'll be examining this further. In the last episode, I spoke on the varying interpretations of the pyramid texts. When words such as Ark and Arche and Akhet are used by Egyptology and most alternatives as well, to speak of it in a spiritual sense and to describe the pyramids as more religious function. However, using these same words and using the astronomical meaning of other words, and such as Mesketu and Sophis and Orion, what we have is a calendar. In the pyramid text, again in the future episodes I'll do that, it's literally talking about the flood cycle and the marsh of reeds, the marsh of reeds, or the field of reeds, the afterlife. So this book on the afterlife is actually describing the literal flood cycles that are in place. And so this image, the bottom piece from the field of reeds, well, Akhet is another water plants. There's water plants. We also see the rising. So here's a better image from the tomb of Ani. We can see canals, yes, flood, Akhi. Also the stairway means to ascend, to rise. And we see again, literally it's describing this system of canals and lakes and rising and needing to go onto a mound to survive, otherwise you got to drown. So here's that's a picture of the flood. Again, from the pyramid to the Nile is 8 kilometers, 5 miles. But here's an older image, and mounds. We see that these, whether it was Heliopolis, Bubastis, also in the references in the Book of the Dead, etc., the mound of Horus, the mound of Set. This was Egyptian life. This was their life. This is the Ben stone, as in the creation myth of Atum, emerged from a flood on a mound, primordial mound of creation, the birth of the gods at Heliopolis, where is the sacred mound, most sacred one in ancient Egypt was. And this is just, it's evident. But So on these, again, we can see in the dry, but again, we can see this town in the shadow of the pyramids. It's built on a mound. The same here. This was Egyptian life prior to the Hieroglyphic Dam. So on the summer solstice or the Egyptian New Year, we have Akhet, the inundation, the flood season. It lasts for 4 months of 30 days, or the season lasts 120 days in total. So during that time, the sun's going to move through the equinox, and it's going to be just a little bit south of true east 120 days later. Very interesting point is that this will cover plus or minus a fraction of a degree, 37 degrees, to mark the 120 days of Akhet, the flood cycle. Just so happens that looking from the 0 point, you see the profile of Khafre's pyramid creating a 3, 4, 5 triangle, this triangle, and that angle is 36.87. Essentially, it's describing the cycle, and it just so happens to be describing a 3, 4, 5 triangle in itself. So is it pure geometry, or is it describing the actual movement of the sun, of this most essential element of Egyptian life, the flood? So following Akhet, 120 days, we have Peret, or the emergence or the growth season. So time to grow, lush grass, animals feeding, time to plant, to cultivate, to look after your orchards. And again, in the field of reeds descriptions, we see the orchards are rich, all the fruits hanging. We're ploughing the soil, we're planting, we're growing. Things are going well. So from there, it's going to be 120 days. So you're going to hit the winter solstice, and you're going to come back essentially to the same position. Again, after the flood, we grow. The land emerges, and then we hit the dry season. And that is Shemu, or the harvest season. So again, another 120 days, or 37 degrees again, and we're going to come back to the beginning of the cycle, the new year, the summer solstice, and it's time to harvest. And feast as well. So again, old photography shows this was the season of harvest. The land went dry, but now we have food. And so the summer solstice, the flood, this is the essence of life. These are the seasons: Akhet, Peret, emergence. This was what was vital to the living, but it was also reflected in the afterlife. So whether it's the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, or the Book of the Dead, Book of Coming Forth by Day, this was their system, this was their belief. It was a reflection of the all-important natural cycles. So Giza as it is, the Giza Plateau as it was and as it is now, but it still carries out the same purpose of possibly many others. But the essential element is that it's a calendar, it's an astronomical observatory, it reflects the life of the living and the cycles of life, the essence of the culture and mythology and every element of the civilization. And we also, I'll be examining this in the next part again, and going into in more detail, going into the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead, and to see how the mythology, which is just so often strictly in a religious interpretation of the afterlife, actually describes the life of the living. The field of reed, or the marsh of reeds, describes a Egyptian afterlife that exactly reflects the life of the living. And if they're read in that sense, and if they're instead of Akhet and Ark being linked to a spiritual element, but being linked more to the flood cycles and to the astronomy connected to it, so whether it's Orion and Sirius and Meskhetiu, the architecture itself embeds this. It's very, very interesting, and just by using the hieroglyphic dictionaries, and instead of the like James P. Allen version where he's literally says it's purely a religious practice to deal with the afterlife is the three seasons of Egypt. That's the field of reeds, the marsh of reeds. They talk about Heliopolis and the Ennead and Atum and the astronomical connections and the known, and also they'll be linking some other essences in regards to constellational and star information and some other work, especially by one Belmonte and his team, who have gone the length and breadth of Egypt down into Nubia and examined hundreds and hundreds of temples and looked at their astronomical alignments, and there is a clear pattern in regards to this, and everything along the Nile lives by this cycle. Before the dam, that was the essence of the Egyptian lifestyle. So is it a religion with science, or it's pure religion? Well, we'll look into it, and as Susan Morrow says, it's when she said she saw in the ancient lines inscribed in inner walls of a pyramid of Unas was a densely compounded by highly precise map of the stars. The Egyptians studied the stars to determine what time of year the Nile will flood and make their land fertile again. In the earliest form of Egyptian philosophy, Morrow said she believes it's not a goddess or a spiritual personality that the Egyptians worshipped, but the sky itself. It was nature itself that was sacred and held the promise of eternal life. The field of reeds, the marsh of reeds, as opposed to the mainstream version, and also most of the alternative versions where they're looking at the pyramid texts as literally a magic spell book, as where it's actually describing the actual world. I realized I was looking at a very vivid, poetic description of the actual world. And again, more in the future in regards to this, and we're looking at other places in Egypt and how the architecture, the archeoastronomy, and the alignment of the temples in regards to Akhet and the flood, and is based on a template which can be found and measured and tested in and on the Giza Plateau and in other, whether it's Thebes, Abydos, or Heliopolis and other sites as well. More on that in the future. But what we have is there's a 0 point marker. It's on the northwest corner of the Khafre Valley Temple, and it is describing and marking both the world of the living and the world of the dead. SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. In the link you'll find in the description you'll find a link to all these papers, and if you'd like to support the channel, there's also a PayPal account, SGD Sacred Geometry. Thank you for watching. More to come on this. We'll be going more and more in depth into regards the actual texts themselves, the archaeoastronomy, temple alignments, and these other elements. Thank you, and have a good one.